Hamas, the butchers of the innocents. They say war turns men into monsters. But what do you call the monsters who start wearing crowns? What do you call the executioners when they start speaking like gods? This isn't about diplomacy or carefully arranged press statements. This is about power, blood, and fear. Hamas has stepped into the spotlight not as a resistance movement, but as a regime that just publicly justified the executions of its own people. Not enemies, not foreign agents, not invading soldiers, Palestinians, men blindfolded, dragged into the street, forced to their knees, shot dead. Crowds watched. The blood didn't even have time to dry before Hamas stood tall and called it necessary. That word, necessary, has built the bones of every dictatorship in history. Tyranny never walks in saying it's tyranny. It comes wearing the uniform of protection, waving the banner of righteousness, whispering that it's doing it for your own good. In Gaza, they didn't just kill people, they killed the idea of justice. When the resistance starts killing its own, it's not resistance anymore, it's domination, it's power tightening its grip. People love to romanticize rebellion. They paint it as a heroic struggle against oppression. But rebellion without accountability always ends the same way, with the rebels becoming the oppressors. Hamas isn't proving its strength right now, it's proving its hunger. These men who were executed never had open trials, no evidence shown, no appeals, no transparency, just a gunshot in a public square, just a message written in fear. Justice is not what happens when armed men decide someone should die. Justice isn't bullets dressed up as law. Justice requires accountability. Justice requires light, not shadow. When a movement normalizes public executions, it's not about punishing individuals. It's about burning fear into the bones of the living. It's a warning. It's a lesson carved into the air with gunfire. If you step out of line, this will be you. Gaza has lived under siege for years, a population suffocated between blockades and bombardments, constantly navigating survival. But now the threat doesn't just come from outside, it comes from inside. It comes with flags and speeches and familiar faces. That's how power works when it festers too long in the dark. It turns inward. It begins to eat its own. Hamas has spent decades building its image as the defender of Palestine, but this moment, this public spectacle of blood, strips away the mask. You can't claim to be a shield while stabbing your own. Executions weren't hidden. They were staged. Ask yourself why. Why the street? Why the floodlights? Why the spectacle? Because terror works better when everyone can see it. Because quiet punishment doesn't scare the masses, but public death does. Public executions are not about justice. They are about control. The goal is to make the people watch, to make them feel their own necks under invisible chains, to whisper to themselves, "That could be me." And once a population starts whispering that, it's already halfway broken. This is how tyranny grows. Not with foreign invaders, but with familiar uniforms. Not with strangers, but with your own. Some will defend Hamas, as they always do, saying security requires strength, traitors must pay, the struggle demands harsh measures. But that's not security, that's brutality polished with excuses. There is no moral high ground in executing civilians without trial. There is no justice in fear. There is no liberation in bullets aimed at your own people. This isn't resistance. This is rule by fear, repackaged as righteousness. The most dangerous tyrants aren't the ones in enemy uniforms. They're the ones who look like home. They're the ones who speak your language, wave your flag, claim they are protecting you. Because when oppression wears the face of familiarity, resistance becomes harder. This is where the moral decay begins. When you can justify killing your own, you can justify anything. People in Gaza are now living under two shadows, the fear of foreign attack and the fear of their own rulers. Imagine walking the streets of your home and knowing the enemy isn't just outside the walls, but waiting at the checkpoint around the corner, and if you speak, you die. That is not protection. That is imprisonment without walls. True resistance movements don't need to execute their own civilians in public squares. True liberation doesn't need to dress violence up as order. These executions are theatre. Every bullet, every bloodstain is part of a performance. A brutal show meant to remind Palestinians who really holds power. This isn't about traitors, it's about control. Every authoritarian regime eventually finds an excuse to turn inward. When they can't crush the external enemy, they crush the internal one. Dissidents, critics, suspects, anyone who doesn't kneel fast enough. Hamas has entered that stage. These killings aren't strength, they're fragility, masquerading as dominance. Only weak powers need to terrorize their own people to stay in control. Every shot fired into the skull of a kneeling Palestinian is a bullet tearing through the idea that Hamas is fighting for the people. Because if you're fighting for the people, you don't execute them in the street. They can cloak it in the language of security, order, or loyalty, but words can't cleanse blood. When a movement loses its moral compass, it becomes the very thing it claimed to fight. And right now, somewhere in Gaza, families are whispering about these executions in the shadows of their own homes. They can't say it out loud. They can't stand in the street. They can only whisper. Because in Gaza, silence isn't a choice. It's survival. Tyranny doesn't begin with grand declarations. It begins with whispers. It begins with people learning to keep their heads down, to not be next. And Hamas knows it. Brutality committed by your own is no less brutal than brutality from your enemies. An execution is an execution. A corpse doesn't care about the flag that justified it. This is not resistance, this is ownership. This is the language of power saying, your life belongs to us. When public executions become the norm, dissent dies before it even begins. Children grow up learning to be quiet. Young people learn not to question. Adults learn the art of silence. This is not protection. This is psychological occupation. Hamas has sent a message. We are the authority. You are disposable. Some people don't want to hear this. They'll accuse critics of betrayal. They'll say that calling Hamas out is taking sides with the enemy. But accountability is not betrayal. Accountability is the foundation of any real liberation. If you can't criticize your own side, then you don't want justice. You want a tyrant. Hamas wants to rule, not liberate. Every execution is a message carved into the collective mind of Gaza, and that message is one word: obey. But power built on fear doesn't last. Fear isn't loyalty, fear isn't trust, fear isn't faith, fear is temporary and it cracks. One day the people they silence will speak louder than the guns. One day the fear they plant will be the soil that buries them, because regimes built on fear eventually drown in it. But until that day, no one should call this justice. No one should call this liberation. No one should let these butchers wear the costume of heroes. If you can execute your own people in the name of resistance, you are no longer the resistance, you are the oppressor, and the world needs to stop looking away. This is not justice, this is not security, this is not freedom, this is blood. On the hands of those who claim to protect, stay sharp, stay skeptical. Never let tyrants wear the mask of heroes. Not right, not left, just real.
The Manifesto Generator. Now in beta. Ever wanted to sound politically engaged without reading anything? Try the Manifesto Generator. Powered by ChatGPT, Marxist memes, and TikTok comment sections. Just enter your favorite buzzwords, and boom, instant clout. The Manifesto Generator. Because facts are hard, and vibes are free.